Curiosity versus fearfulness. How does this impact you and your learning process for software engineering? And what about the idea of a fixed mindset versus a growth mindset? In this podcast, we learn about Dr. Dweck's research and how your mindset can make all the difference for your learning trajectory. Welcome back to another episode of Becoming a Software Engineer. Alright, so first up is curiosity versus fear. I've been teaching for quite a long time now, and one thing I noticed is that those who are curious about the material that they are learning are just simply way better in terms of their trajectory than those who are fearful. And what's interesting is there are times when those who are fearful, come in at a higher learning point. So, maybe they have literally learned more than those who are curious to begin with. But you can clearly see a trajectory difference. And of course, the trajectory difference is that those who are curious do way, way, way better. And so that's why one of the things that I wanted to do in this podcast was really to try to convince people that they should start noticing themselves and start diagnosing, am I approaching this particular type of situation with curiosity or fear? All right, so let's give an example. Let's say you're coding and like every day of a programmer's life, you run into an error screen. The question is how do you respond? Well, those who are curious tend to quite literally find interest in the fact that something is going on in their code that they did not expect. So they almost see it as an opportunity for them to find out either that they're making, simple mistakes, which in itself they're trying to correct. And they're wondering to themselves, why am I making these basic mistakes? Or that it's not a simple mistake and that really they have a lot that they should be learning. So there's some critical mistake that they made. For example, they were treating something as an array when it was actually an object. And they realize, oh, wow, I don't know why I thought that way. And they immediately start correcting that situation. But on top of that, because they're curious, they bookmark that in their own mind. So they tend to retain that detail for longer. And it's crazy because you can almost see this self-fulfilling motivation within. Right? They were curious to find out what is my flaw, because I approached the session today with this idea of surely I must not be a perfect programmer. That's kind of obvious. And so the question for me is what can I do to better myself? How can I identify a flaw and perhaps improve in one, maybe if I'm lucky, two different ways today? And when they approach their work session with that kind of attitude, then they end up in a situation where they can learn as much as possible. That's what curiosity looks like. Fear looks totally different. Fear is the kind of response where you almost hear it in the voice where they say, oh my goodness, another error screen. Or wow, this thing just won't go away. So you almost see them personifying the error screen. Let's think about what the error screen is, right? The error screen is simply there to try to give you more information on where things went wrong. There is no boogie monster that is coming to get you, right? So it's not a matter of, some personified thing that is the gatekeeper where you deserve to have correct code and your code is correct, but this one bad monster is not letting your code through. That is such a wrong view of what's actually happening. Instead, you should be thinking wait, hang on a second. I thought my code was correct. That's why I ran my code. But instead, I find out my code is not correct. What that means is that I'm not entitled to correct code when I didn't write correct code. And in fact, I'm very grateful that somebody programmed, and this is the piece that some people forget, somebody had to program in the fact that there will be an error message that helps us in the first place. Put it this way, if you really, really want a different perspective on things, think of your dream company. And I don't know what your dream company would be. Maybe it's a small startup, maybe it's kind of a medium size, maybe it's a scale up. Who knows? Maybe it's one of the larger companies like Google. Google, great. Let's just say the big G. Okay. Let's say you are in an interview with the big G. And the question is this. You write some code, maybe on a whiteboard, maybe on Google Docs, right? And you're not even allowed to run it. But somebody tells you before you quote unquote submit, somebody tells you that there's an error. And somebody tells you that there's a good chance it's in line 45. And the question to you is, would you like to be told that, or would you not want to be told that? Because if you're not told that, I mean, there's a great chance that you probably won't get through the interview round. And the reason why is that you'll be stumbling on the error and not knowing where the error is. You won't be able to fix it. And it's hands down obvious that, well, you did write code that has error. And so when you think about it like that, the error screen is literally information that helps you. Perhaps the issue is that it was almost always coded in red. And maybe we all kind of psychologically look at red font and think to ourselves, I don't like red font. I'm used to seeing red font when it's like, oh, you got 32% in school instead of getting 75 or 85 or whatever. And so maybe, like a red font is like when, you're writing an essay and your teacher kind of like circles all the mistakes in a red marker. Maybe that's the association that you have with everything. But in all honesty, regardless of the color, think about the content that is being delivered. Without that content, you might have to trace through your code way more carefully and not find your error in the first place. And remember, whether you trace through your code or utilize the error screen or not, you do have an error in that code. That's why the error screen came up in the first place. So you can either align yourself to reality and tell yourself, you know what, that's really interesting that I wrote code thinking that it's correct, but apparently there's something wrong or there's some condition that I didn't consider. And I would like to learn about that because that would make me a stronger developer. Now, of course, that's really easy to do. Obviously, theoretically, it's very compelling that you should be a curious learner. But I must admit, there's obviously some form of frustration that will enter into your coding, work cycle. And so, when you find yourself being frustrated, just remember that you don't want to make frustration you don't want to make it your habit. So you don't want to approach things with fear. When you can always kind of stop yourself and tell yourself, no, you know what? I'm going to approach it with curiosity instead. So the moral of that story is show some love to error screens. Honestly, whenever they say what you do in response to failure is what determines if you will be successful, well, this is literally the same thing, right? What you do in response to an error screen is going to determine if you're a fast learner, good learner, if you're going to plateau, if you're going to plow through, move forward. It's going to determine all of these things. And the beautiful part is that you see error screens every single day. And so since it is your response to error screens that really differentiate you as a learner, and since you get to see it every single day, you get to differentiate yourself as the faster, or shall I say more elite learner. And of course, we can't help but think to ourselves, why? Why is it that some people are curious while others are fearful? And this leads us really perfectly to the next part of the conversation, which is growth mindset versus fixed mindset. So if you've read the book Mindset, The New Psychology of Success by Dr. Carol Dweck. She is a psychologist and a very popular writer. So please do go and read her book. But I'm going to kind of summarize some of the points, at least, that's in there. In a 2012 interview, Dweck defined fixed and growth mindset like this. In a fixed mindset, students believe their basic abilities, their intelligence, their talent are just fixed traits. They have a certain amount, and that's that. And then their goal becomes to look smart all the time and never look dumb. In a growth mindset, students understand that their talent and abilities can be developed through effort, good teaching, and persistence. They don't necessarily think everyone's the same or anyone can be Einstein, but they believe everyone can get smarter if they work at it. And that kind of makes sense, right? Because if you have a fixed mindset, it means that you don't believe that you can change. And so if you don't believe you can change, if you don't think that you can learn something, then it makes a lot of sense that you would want to look smarter, that you would want to look better than you really are. Because at that point, since you cannot change, the best thing that you can do is present yourself in the best way possible. Unfortunately, that hurts your ability to learn. We all know that you have to be able to make mistakes and then work with the struggle in order for you to learn. If you can't work with the struggle because showing your struggle means that you don't know, and that this in itself means that you're not a smart person, and that the general formula that you have is that you need to look as smart as possible, then, well, how are you going to learn? Because you have to expose that vulnerability if you want to learn. And of course, those with a fixed mindset have particular difficult time with that very process. Take, on the other hand, somebody with a growth mindset. They fundamentally believe that they can change. They believe that they can learn. And so it isn't really particularly interesting for them that, they make a mistake. It's kind of obvious that people can make mistakes, and they believe, hey, well, what's the big deal? Yeah, maybe I did make a dumb mistake, but I can learn, and then I'm smarter afterwards. So I actually have no problem just going out into the world and telling everybody, hey, look, I'm probably going to make some stupid mistakes, but that's why I'm here. I'm here to learn. And I have no problem with that because I can grow into, somebody that's way more knowledgeable over time. And obviously, when you think about that mindset is so much better when it comes to learning. So let's just talk a little bit about the differences. So if you're faced with a challenge, those with a fixed mindset want to inherently avoid the challenge. And why? Because it can expose them. And once they're exposed, remember, they can't change. And that would be terrible. Those with a growth mindset, however, they love challenges. They embrace it because it is an opportunity for them to yet again get better. Remember, they fundamentally believe that they can change. Let's talk about obstacles. When you are met with something that's actually difficult and it almost feels like, hey, I wonder if I can get over this hump. Those with a fixed mindset will give up easily. Why? Because at the first sign of anything difficult, they see it as a threat, as, once again, the thing that will expose them of who they truly are. And remember, who you are simply cannot change for those that have a fixed mindset. But those who have a growth mindset, they will persist through the obstacle. And the reason why is, I can change. If I can change and get better, then why wouldn't I just do that in the first place? Carol Dweck also talks about effort. She says that fixed mindset folks see effort as a fruitless thing. On the other hand, those with a growth mindset believe that effort is the primary thing that helps them to take the path of mastery and become successful. Because they believe fundamentally that they can change, it would obviously be the case that effort becomes the most important factor for that path forward. Along the same lines, Carol also talks about criticism. So those who have a fixed mindset, they absolutely hate criticism. They hate any sort of negative feedback, and they only like positive feedback. And why? Well, again, if you can't change, the best that you can get is to get reviews about how great you are. Because as soon as you have any review about how not great you are, well, you're stuck with that because you can't change. And naturally, those with a growth mindset, they're going to have a totally opposite approach. They're going to think, okay, it's great if you lavish me with accolades and tell me how great I am. Please, it's great to get praise. However, I would really like to get better. And so it would be nice if I can get some more criticism. And thank you very much for telling me about where I'm weak and what I need to change. Finally, Carol talks about how those who have a fixed mindset tend to interpret the success of others poorly. They tend to feel threatened by the success of others. And they certainly don't find any inspiration from the success of others. And again, on the other hand, those who have a growth mindset, they are absolutely ecstatic when others succeed. And the reason why is they think to themselves, you know what? I get to learn from all the lessons and I get to get all the inspiration from this person. And then I can use that to, once again, change myself. So clearly, there's some big differences when it comes to fixed mindset versus growth mindset. So let's just bring this all back to the beginning of this episode where we talked about curiosity versus fear. It becomes really obvious who is going to be curious about things. It's obviously the person who fundamentally believes in a growth mindset versus the person who has a fixed mindset. It's obvious that this person will approach everything with fear. Whereas the fixed mindset person would say, I can't do it. The growth mindset person will say, I can't do it yet. And it's important to remember that these aren't just cool ideas. These are based off of scientific studies that Dweck actually did. They looked at the neural activity within the brain for those who are identified as fixed mindset versus those who are identified as growth mindset. And one thing that they noticed was those who have a growth mindset have way more neural activity when it comes to moments when they made a mistake. So their awareness around the mistake, their wantingness to almost engage with the mistake that they made on an intellectual level was probably much higher, especially when you see the actual scans, right? And these scans, they'll kind of show you if it's blue, it's really cold. Then it kind of goes to green, yellow, and if it's red, that means that it's really activating. Your brain is really activating. And so when they do these scans, they can kind of see which parts of the brain is activating and which parts of the brain is not activating. And so it was truly amazing, when you see these studies, to see that somebody with a growth mindset, literally on a biological level, is getting way more activity in the brain when they make a mistake compared to those with a fixed mindset. On perhaps a literal level, but at least on a metaphorical level. You can think of it like this. Those who have a fixed mindset, they are almost trying to block out the lesson and everything around it because, again, the fastest they run away would be the best thing possible. They committed the sin, so to speak, and they just need to get out of the crime scene as fast as possible. Versus those with the growth mindset know that they made a mistake, but that they can change it. And it's all about taking interest and being aware of exactly what the mistake is. But for you to do that, you would need to engage with the mistake. And naturally, that would mean that you would need far more brain activity. But it's just really interesting because all of this really boils down to your habits and your general philosophy around who you are. Do you believe that you can change or do you not? Benjamin Barber, an eminent sociologist, once said, I don't divide the world into the weak and the strong, or the successes and the failures. I divide the world into the learners and non-learners. So then really the question is, how? How do we become learners? How can we stay curious? The answer is that it all boils down to having a great growth-centered mindset.